Hello everyone. My topic for today is all about genetically modified organism. Genetically modified organism, it is an organism whose genetic has been altered using engineering techniques. From the word genetically, which comes from the word gene, as we all know, organism is an individual, animal, plant, or single life form. So it's like the gene of the plant or animals were being experimented to contain or to have new traits. Some example of engineering techniques are creation of recombinant DNA, gene transfer, gene cloning, and plant breeding. And lastly is a DNA transfer. So when we talk about DNA transfer, it is the passage of DNA to objects and people. And also, when we talk about creation of recombinant DNA, it artificially made DNA strand that form by combination of two or more gene sequence, which make a plant or animal characteristic change. So as I was explaining, I forgot to let you know about the meaning of DNA. So DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid. It is a complex molecule that contains all the information necessary to build and maintain organism. And also, it is a molecule that contains a genetic code that is unique to every individual. Next, genetically modified organisms are source of medicine. Genetically modified foods are widely used in scientific research and produce other goods. But before we explain that, let's go back to what is gene. Gene is the basic of heredity passed from parent to child. Gene can be found in chromosomes, where chromosomes can be found in nucleus of cells. The first genetically modified mouse was produced in 1974 by neurologist Rudolf Gerich, where JV40 virus are injected into early stage mouse embryos to help or to make the mouse develop new character traits. Next, the first plant was produced in 1983, and that first GMO plant was tobacco resistant to antibiotics. It was founded by Michael W. Bevan, Richard B. Flavin, and Mary Del Charlton. And last, the genetically modified human was born on July 21, 1997. I did trying researching about who was this person, but it turns out that his or her information was confidential and cannot be found on Google. So let's move on to uses of GMO. GMO have wide array of application in different fields of biology. GMO purpose helps farmer prevent crops and loss and control weeds. First, we have human gene therapy. Second, transgenic plants or crops. Number three, producing food quality traits. Number four, research use. Number five, microbes. Number six, mammal. The GMO foods provide better nutrition and perhaps even be engineered to contain medical compound to enhance human health. This could be achieved by using engineering techniques like injecting some character traits of other organism which transfer to that specific organism that you want to be or you want their gene to be altered. First is the human gene therapy. Gene therapy is a collection of methods that allows correction of a gene defect that has been diagnosed in an embryo. Genes are inserted into a person's cell and tissue to treat. This is a technique, or gene therapy is a technique that modifies a person's genes to treat or cure diseases, which replacing diseases causing gene with a healthy gene. So the process of this is inject the vector carrying the gene directly to the patient. So that genes that have been injected will be the one to cure the disease. Correction of genetic effects involve delivery of a normal gene into the individual or embryo to take over the function and of compensate for the non-functional gene. So this is what I told you about earlier, that those non-functional genes are being replaced by the functional gene that are being injected. So now let's move on to genetically modified crops. They are plants used in agriculture, the DNA of which have been modified using genetic engineering techniques. Let's let's assume a corn. So if you want the corn to contain a new character traits, we just have to inject a new gene to make and contain a new character. So the plants that have had their genomes modified through genetic engineering techniques, either by the addition of a foreign gene or removal of a certain detrimental gene. So when we say genomes, it is a complete set of genetic information of organism. Next, aim to introduce a new trait to the plant which does not occur naturally in the species. Or it is like you are creating a new plant characteristic. So next, example of food crops include resistant to certain pests, diseases or environmental condition, reduction of spoilage or resistant to chemical treatment. Example, resistant to herbicide or improving the nutrients profile of the crop. In this way, the crops has been changed, which make it more useful. Once the plant has been used about engineering techniques, it can be called, for example, a corn, it can be called BT corn. BT stands for Bacillus thuringiensis, where it is a group of soil microbes that are used to control certain insect pests. So, genetically modified crops, examples in non-food crops include production of pharmaceutical agents, biofuels, and other industrial useful goods. But before we continue to the next reporter, let me also discuss you about the transgenic plants producing food traits, research genes, microbes, and mammal. So transgenic plants. So I already told you lately that transgenic plants called BT corn, or BT stands for Bacillus thuringiensis, and so on. Next, producing food quality traits. So as we all know, almost all food spoil in less than 2 or 3 days. So some scientists used used engineering techniques or make a GMO modify or genetically modified plants to create a food that cannot be spoiled in less than 2 to 3 days. So the last one is the microbes, microorganism of microscopic size. So they are really tiny living things that found around us. We can see it on our naked eye. Microbes are like bacteria and yeast are genetically modified to produce pharmaceuticals such as insulin, human growth hormone, and vaccines. So now I am done for my topic. So let's move on to the next reporter, which is Michaela M.
And genetically modified food. There are foods produced from a using of GM or a genetically organism are often referred to as GM foods. The next is GM foods are developed and marketed because there is a perceived advantage either to the producer or consumer of these foods. This is meant to translate into a product with a lower price yet a benefit in terms of durability of natural value or both. Initially, GM or a genetically modified said developers wanted their their products to be accepted by producers to have concentrated on that bring direct benefit to farmers and the food industry generally. The last one is one of the objectives for developing plants based on a GM or a genetically modified organism is to improve a crop production. The GM genetically modified crops currently on the market are mainly aimed at an increased level of and the GM or genetically modified crops currently on the market are mainly aimed at the increased level of crop protection through the introduction of resistance against the plant disease caused by the insect species or the to increase tolerance towards herbicides. The next is social concerns, health trust. Like for example, ang kanang cancer like kanang may bawa ni may 50-50 ba or mamamatay, mabuhi ka or mamatay. Then sunod is social. The next is environment kana bitong mga kanang mga aso sa sakyanan. Mga daw siya sa atong health wellness. Ang sunod is labeling GMO genetically food or economic issues. And then the next is health risk. There's many scientific data indicate that animals fed by genetic modified crops have been harmed Or like for example, rats exposed to GM potatoes and soya had abnormally young sperm, and then for example is the cow, goats, buffalo, pigs, and other livestock growing or epitomize and certain body condition complications including early delivery, abortions, infertility, and more death. And next is human. Many companies do not accept the direct link between GMF or consumption that human health risks. For example, foodborne disease such as soya allergies are increased over the years in the UK and US. Many villages or cotton handlers have developed skin allergies in India. And if mga apply sa ta kayo maginanam jud tag requirements of medical kung unsa imong kanang bawal sa imuha.
Environmental risk. Genes may skip and find their way into other members of species or other species. Imagine the trouble of herbicide resistance genes found their way into weeds. Second, GM crops could complete or bred with species threatening biodiversity. Third, monogenetic crops may not react sufficiently to environmental stresses, posing danger or reenactment or irrelevance potato famine. And last, unintended harm to other species. Example of environmental risk: climate change, air pollution, and deforestation. GM labeling. First, a proper labeling represents the GM word along with additional information on genes characteristics and external source of inserted genes. Second, why is it necessary to label GM food? It's not about health issue, rather it is about consumers' right to make an informed choice on GM. Economic issue. First, risk of patent enforcement, which may oblige farmers may depend on giant engineering companies such as Monsanto for strains with their crops pollinated. Second, patenting new plants varieties will raise the price of seeds so high that small farmers will not be able to afford seeds for GM crops, thus widening the gap between the wealthy and poor. Example of economic issue: first, market access or trade barriers, and increased production costs.
GMO and ethical issues. First, genetic modification of organisms can have unpredictable results when such organisms are introduced into the ecosystem. When scientists change the genes of plants or animals and put them into nature, sometimes unexpected things happen. For example, a modified plant might spread too quickly and crowd out other plants, which can upset the balance of the environment. Second, the modification usage of living organisms for public services as food and medicine sources, for example, has also created problems with patents granted for the same. It's a problem because when companies get patents for modified organisms used in things like food and medicine, they can control who can use them. This can lead to high prices and limited access for people who need them, which isn't fair. It can also slow down innovation and make it harder for everyone to get what they need for health and food. Third, there is growing public anger that certain companies are being granted patents for products and technologies that make use of the genetic materials, plants, and other biological resources that have long been identified, developed and used by farmers and in the indigenous people of a specific region, country. Fourth, biopiracy is a term used to refer to the use of bioresources by multinational companies and other organizations without proper authorization from the countries and people concerned without compensatory payment. Biopiracy happens when big companies or groups use plants, animals, or other natural things from a country without asking permission or paying it. They might take these resources to make new medicines or products without giving anything back to the people or the place where they came from.
An example is when a company takes a plant from a rainforest, uses it to make a profitable drug, but doesn't share the profits with the local communities or government who originally owned the plant. Fifth, most of the industrialized nations are rich financially but poor in biodiversity and traditional knowledge. In contrast, the developing and the underdeveloped world is rich in biodiversity and traditional knowledge related to bioresources. Most industrialized countries have lots of money because they focus on industries like technology and manufacturing, but they often lack biodiversity and traditional knowledge about bioresources because they've developed their economies in ways that prioritize money over nature. On the other hand, developing and underdeveloped countries have rich biodiversity and traditional knowledge because they rely more on nature for their livelihoods and haven't developed their economies as much as in other areas. Sixth, there has been growing realization of the injustice, inadequate compensation, and benefit sharing between developed and developing countries. Therefore, some nations are developing laws to prevent such unauthorized exploitation of their bioresources and traditional knowledge.